Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there. I know I am doing very well today, specifically today, which is an incredible day. I've been teaching this Bible for a long time, teaching this Bible stuff, I should say, for a long time, sharing my views, helping people understand things the way that I see them, with my YouTube channel and, in various discussions and here and there, trying to help relatives see what I see, trying to, get the truth of what I believe to be the true biblical understanding out there so people can see it, they can hear it, they can become familiar with it, and they can make the decision for themselves based on the evidence. And since 2011 is when I first began studying the Bible, so some of you old-timers out there will probably, laugh and scoff at that and say, well, I've been studying the Bible for 45 years. Well, it doesn't matter, okay? I know people who have been studying the Bible for 55 years and they couldn't make their way out of a brown paper bag with it, okay? So in terms of longevity, it really doesn't matter, okay? I could be studying the Bible for a year and have a better grasp than somebody who has been studying it for 30, right? Time is certainly not the end factor. And to take a little wisdom out from the Bible, right? Doesn't it say that the weak or the stupid will teach the wise or something like that? I don't know. I forget the verse, but there's something in there that says that, right? Anyway, today's an incredible day. I've been toying back and forth with some ideas and some conclusions in the New Testament now for a while. Obviously, I've been sharing I.O. for years. I don't know exactly how many, 8, 9, somewhere in that range. And I've been lately really considering Ephraim. And, because we know Ephraim is promised to become a fullness of nations back in Genesis, back at the start. He's promised to become very numerous, very great, and become a literal fullness of nations. So I've been really focusing on how Ephraim fits into this story. And I've been going back and forth. And if you follow my YouTube channel, back a couple weeks ago around Christmas time, I shared in the community tab, which is basically my writings, if you will, which I do once here and there. In that tab, I shared a sort of a PDF that I made that shows a little bit of a flow chart on how it could possibly break down. And I have been toying with that for a while. And in my mind, I knew that I was close, right? I know I.O. is correct, right? There's no doubt. I'm sold 100%. You could never tell me anything else. And that's basically from my journey over the 14 years of studying and seeing different viewpoints, comparing, contrasting, tossing things out that are okay, keeping things that are great, trashing things that are really bad, just kind of going through the motions and figuring out what works and what doesn't. But I had always, started to recently now think about Ephraim and think about that promise. And so, this came to me basically today. I was sitting there and just thinking about things and wondering, am I ever going to piece this fully together? Because the true test of something being correct is, does it fit, right? Not just in one place, not just in 2 places, not even in 3 places. Is it woven throughout the entirety of the story, right? And if it is, then there's a good chance that you're on the right track. And so this morning, when I finally got that last Tetris chip or Tetris piece to fall in place, when you used to get that final piece you needed and it banged down and all of them disappeared and you got all those points, that's exactly what happened this morning. It was like a light bulb moment that went off in my mind, and then all of a sudden I was testing it against other scriptures to see if it worked, like I always do. And sure enough, this is, in my opinion, the only answer right here, what I'm about to present to you today, folks. And it will answer a number of problems, a number of tough things. It will iron out some of the problems that I.O. has, in terms of certain passages that might be a little cloudy. It's going to iron out a lot of the questions and the promises. And I think what you'll understand today is that, we're in for something special, right? Like, we figured this out. That's what's the coolest part about this. And I will say I'm not really involved in any circles of I.O. at the moment. However, if you've already thought of this, good for you. Kudos to you. If you've, written about it, if you've posted things about it, that's great. Kudos to you. Personally, I've never seen anybody present it this way. I think that this is the ultimate final way that it should be presented. And maybe it'll change, but I feel really good about this. And I think that you're going to as well. But I just wanted to throw that out there, that if you've held this position in its entirety, right? Obviously, we've all held bits and pieces of what I'm about to present to you. But the way that I'm going to tie it and weave it together and show you what this actually is, I think will answer the questions once and for all, and will, unfortunately for a lot of folks, unfortunately for us, will hang the IO crown high up top for nobody to touch forever. Okay, IO is the only way. So let's get right into it. Okay, and I want you to follow along. If you have a pen and a paper, write stuff down, take notes. I'm going to be slow and steady. I want you to follow along. And what I'll do is hopefully in the comments, once I post the video, which will hopefully be tomorrow, I will enter some notes to kind of guide the people who are better with reading rather than listening. But I would advise you to take some notes because this is should blow your mind. Okay, so here we go. In Genesis 48, we start out. Now, mind you, we've already progressed through some of the ancestral folklore, if you will, of Israel, the earliest fathers, Adam, Cain and Abel, Noah, and the magical ark. We've progressed through that, and we've come to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Specifically now, we're at Jacob. We have Jacob he's dying, right? He's on his deathbed in Genesis 48. And his son Joseph brings his two kids or two sons to Jacob to get his blessing so he could lay his hands on them. And this particular prophecy is immensely important because it's going to really set up the stage for everything that we see later on, okay? And it cannot be stressed enough. Jacob lays his hands on the head of Ephraim, who's the younger, and he says, he's supposed to lay his hands on Manasseh, but he goes to Ephraim and he says, truly this one will be much greater. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but the point is he tells Joseph and he makes the promise before God, through God, by God, that Ephraim's descendants will become a fullness of nations, a multitude of nations. The actual translation in the Hebrew is fullness of nations, which we're going to see Paul later on refer to in the last days of the New Testament times as a group of people that he is seeking out. Okay, it's the only two places in the whole Bible that term fullness of nations is used, is Genesis 48 when speaking of Ephraim's descendants, that would be Israelites, folks, heirs of promise, would become the fullness of nations. And again, in Romans 11, at the end of the Bible, where Paul is now seeking out a fullness of nations so that all Israel might be saved, okay? Do you see the freight train coming? I hope you do. Okay, so here we go. Genesis 48, we have the promise to Ephraim that his descendants would become a fullness of nations. Okay, so if you're going to write anything down there, maybe write Ephraim will become fullness of nations, okay? Now, it's kind of tough. I want to get a lot of things said here, and I'll bounce around a little bit. But let's just keep going with it. So we have the designation that Ephraim's going to become the fullness of nations, okay? I'm going to jump over to Jesus, okay, in the Gospels. And stick with me here. I promise you this will all come together. You have to stick with this. Okay, we're going to go to Jesus in Matthew chapter 15, verse 24, which is a very much debated passage in all of Christianity, one that strikes fear into the hearts of those who disagree with IO, and one that is relied upon heavily of those of us who are IO, and that's the passage when Jesus says, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, there's a lot of contention, there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of disagreement on what Jesus meant when he said this. Obviously, there's implications here. So what did Jesus mean? Well, it is now my conclusion, it is now my understanding that Jesus was speaking of all 12 tribes when he said he only comes for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Okay? He's speaking of all 12 tribes. Okay? Now, remember, this is how it kind of flows. Jesus comes on the scene. He gathers his 12 apostles. He calls them, and he sets them out to become fishers of men. But if you notice in the Gospels, as soon as he's done rallying up the 12 apostles, he immediately says that he comes only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So it is my theory, it is my firm belief that each of the apostles represents one of the tribes. So he's setting out the 12 apostles. Remember, this verse, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel, is stated immediately after he assembles the 12 apostles and as he puts them out and gives them the Great Commission to go and seek his sheep. Okay, so it is my belief that these 12 apostles, one for each tribe, represent the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, now stick with me here. Okay, there's another passage that he says, go not by the way of the Gentile, not by the way of the Samaritan. Go ye only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Again, here's Jesus commissioning the 12 apostles to go only to the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, he says, don't go to the nations. Don't go by the way of the Samaritans. In my opinion, the reason why he did this is because in the beginning, when he first came, the gospel was only going to Israel, right? To the Jew first. Okay, and that's Israel in that day. That's the total body of Israel in that day. The gospel was going to them. And then it would go to the Gentiles. Second, it would go to the Greek later. Okay, but think about this, okay? We have the 12 apostles called out to go to the 12 tribes. I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Later on, God calls a 13th apostle by the name of Paul, and Paul's mission is to go and gather the fullness of nations. Okay, so some of you are probably wondering how that all ties in. Well, it ties in pretty beautifully. Paul comes and he's looking, as the 13th apostle called, he's going out for the fullness of nations. Now, if you know anything about the 12 tribes of Israel, okay, the original 12 tribes, I'm going to read them to you, okay? They were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Naphtali, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, Benjamin, Dan, and Gad. Okay, now, those are the original 12. Joseph, as one of those original 12, had a double portion. So Joseph was given a double portion, and he had Ephraim and Manasseh, who were added to the tribes as half-tribes. So when you take the original 12, okay, and you add in Ephraim and Manasseh, you have 14, okay? But what's interesting is Dan is actually cast away. Dan is like a serpent, it says in Deuteronomy. So Dan actually falls, right? And Dan doesn't seem to inherit any promise. So when you look at Revelation 7, I hope I'm not bouncing too much. I hope you're sticking with me here. When we look at Revelation chapter 7, okay, we see here that we have Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. So we have 12 tribes. Dan is gone. Dan's been kicked out as a serpent. But Ephraim's missing, right? So you have the 12 tribes listed, okay? Ephraim's missing. Well, John then looks and beholds a great multitude which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, tongues, and people, crying out, salvation belongs to our God. So there's your 13 tribes, people, okay? In accordance with the promise made in Genesis 48 about Ephraim becoming the nations, Ephraim was the 13th tribe, because with Manasseh and Ephraim, there was 14 tribes total, but Dan was eliminated. So there would have been 13 total tribes. Okay, let me repeat that. When you look at the full 12 tribes of Israel, the original, and you look at Joseph being given Manasseh and Ephraim, a double portion, there's a total of 14 total Israelite tribes. Dan is removed. Dan is nowhere to be found. Dan doesn't get a part of the promise. Everybody agrees on that. And so you have a total of 13 total tribes. But one of those tribes was prophesied to become a fullness of nations, a great multitude, far too great to number, and that was Ephraim. So in Revelation 7, when we see the 12 tribes listed, we notice Ephraim is gone. So the first part of Revelation 7 is seeing the 12 tribes of Israel. That's the Jesus in Matthew 15:24 saying, I come only for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And then as we look further in verse 9 of Revelation 7, after these things I looked and beheld a great multitude from all nations singing, salvation belongs to our God, coming back from all nations, tribes, tongues, and kindreds. That, my friends, is Ephraim. And they correspond to Paul, the 13th apostle, whose mission and ministry was for the nations. Hence Romans 11, blindness in part has happened to Israel as a whole, until the fullness of the nations comes in. In this way, all Israel, all true Israel, all 13 tribes of Israel will be saved. Now, I know some people are, saying, oh, no, that's a little weird. Some people are probably interested. Well, there's more. Jesus in John 10 is talking about the sheep. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for his sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep, here it is, verse 16 of John chapter 10. Jesus says this, remember, before Paul, Jesus is making this statement, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring. They will hear my voice, and there will be one shepherd and one flock. So Jesus just commissioned these apostles to go out to the 12 tribes of Israel, to only go to the 12 tribes of Israel. At this current time, they are not to go to the Gentiles. They are not to go to the Samaritans. They are only to go to the 12 tribes of Israel. Later on, some 6, 7, 8 years, it's debated, whatever it may have been, Paul is struck off a horse, and he would be the vessel that brings light to the nations. Okay? He would be the vessel, that is going to bring in the fullness of the nations as the 13th apostle, coinciding and correlating to the 13th tribe, Ephraim. Okay? So the other sheep that he has not of this fold is Jesus pre-telling or, predicting or foretelling that other sheep are going to come, other sheep beyond the fold that I'm speaking of here, beyond the 12 tribes, beyond the nation of Israel in that day. Other sheep beyond them are going to come. That's Ephraim. That's the nations. That's Jesus foretelling that he's going to eventually call Paul, knock him off his horse, send him out to the nations to gather in the fullness of those out there. And they would be a great multitude, because that's what Ephraim was predicted exactly to become. Jesus also said that the gospel of the kingdom will go to all nations and then the end will come. Again, foretelling the process of going to the Jew Israelite first, 12 tribes, and then going out to the nations for Ephraim. All nations, and then the end will come. Caiaphas in John chapter 11, when speaking to the Pharisees, he says, nor do you consider this, that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. It says, now this he did not say on his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation, that's Israel. And it goes on, it says, and not for the nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. Folks, scattered abroad is Ephraim. The children of God scattered abroad is Ephraim. It's the nation's portion of the gospel mission to save all Israel. I hope you see how this is coming together lovely. Okay? Now, there's more. So, the 12 tribes plus Ephraim equals all Israel. Let me repeat that. You might be saying, well, how does the term 12 tribes of Israel work in all of this if what you're saying is true? If Ephraim's the 13th tribe coinciding or correlating to Paul, who's the 13th apostle going out for them, how does that work with the term the 12 tribes of Israel? Well, it would work just fine, because all Israel, all 12 tribes, actually includes Ephraim and Manasseh, if you really think about it. Because remember, you have the original tribes. Bear with me one moment. Sorry about that. I was getting a call I had to take. So my point of that is you can call them the 12 tribes just the same. And the reason is because Manasseh and Ephraim only equal one tribe. They're half tribes, right? So technically, they're full tribes, but the Bible refers to them as half tribes because Joseph was given a double portion. So that would be one portion for him and one portion for his two sons, which were considered half tribes. So if you count Manasseh and Ephraim as one tribe total, and then you add in the other 11 tribes here that are listed in Revelation 7, you have the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, so that's a little tricky to understand, but again, Manasseh and Ephraim are one tribe. Technically, they're a half tribe, so they would only take up, one spot. Or you could look at it, the other way with the double portion, whatever. But they're taking up one spot collectively. So in addition to them, you have Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. So you have those 11 plus Manasseh and Ephraim as the 12. So technically, they are still the 12 tribes of Israel. And that is why Paul says when the fullness of the nations comes in, all Israel will be saved. So I think we have really some groundbreaking stuff here, how it all kind of ties together. And it all starts with Ephraim, fullness of nations. In the beginning, I was sort of torn between, is the fullness of nations just Ephraim, just that 13th half tribe, if you will? Or is the fullness of nations the 10 northern tribes, including Ephraim? And I think, I've always kind of leaned that way, but the last couple of months I've been seeing things differently and testing different things, and just had that light bulb moment this morning. And I said, you know what? This checks off a ton of boxes, and it makes perfect sense. Because remember, Jesus comes along, and right from the get-go, Jesus had the nations in view, right? There's bozos out there that like to say there's multiple streams of salvation going out, and different, plans. Like Jesus's plan was one, and then Paul came and had a different plan for different people. But really, the true story is that this is all, sovereignly laid out perfectly, so that the 12 apostles are called during the Israel/Jew phase, the 12 tribes of Israel, and they would go out, and Jesus told them, go only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, don't go to any nations, of course, because the gospel was not going to the nations yet. But remember, he had said already that the gospel would go to the nations, so he already knew. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't like he changed his mind and added to the mission. No, that was outlined from the start. It was just that he hadn't called forth the vessel Paul, who was going to bring it to the nations, who was going to bring it to Ephraim, the 13th tribe. Okay, Paul, as the 13th apostle, takes the gospel to the 13th tribe. And of course, like I said, they are considered all Israel. Collectively, the fullness of nations plus the 12 tribes equals all Israel, because Ephraim and Manasseh would have only been half tribes, and therefore still equaling a total of 12 tribes once Dan is out of there, which Dan has been out of there for a long time, and all scholars agree that he got the boot. And that goes back to Deuteronomy and the prediction Moses made at his death about each of the 12 tribes. So anyway, I think it's pretty groundbreaking stuff. I think we see Jesus say in the beginning as well, while the mission's still going to the 12 tribes, the Israelites, he says that he has sheep not of this fold. That would be Ephraim. That would be the nations. And also, it kind of sheds a little more light on Isaiah 49, doesn't it, right? The passage that guys like Preston and others like to bring up, Isaiah 49:6, which is, it says, I will restore the preserved of Jacob and call back the outcasts of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the nations so that my salvation could reach the ends of the earth. Well, if what I'm saying is correct, then that works beautifully, because Jacob and Israel would have been the 12 tribes, and the Gentiles, aka the nations, that salvation's going out to is Ephraim, the 13th tribe, the one that was said to become a fullness of nations. So that is sort of like the order of the gospel, is it not? It first goes to the Jew and then to the nations. Well, that's what Isaiah says. He says, I will give you as a light to the, he says, I will bring back Jacob and restore the preserved of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the nations. Notice how the light to the nations comes after Israel is saved. So, or after, I should say, the gospel goes out to Israel, at least in the beginning. Then it goes to the nations, and then all Israel is saved once the fullness of the nations comes in. So I think this is pretty amazing stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. Share it, please. Share it everywhere. I think we really just figured out the entire story, which makes it even harder for wannabe Israelites to argue against IO, because now we can kind of link all of this together now that we know that it was actually Ephraim, the tribe, because Ephraim is used in the Old Testament to speak of all 10 northern tribes as well. That's where it gets a little tricky. That's where I was undecided, because Ephraim is also the dominant of the northern tribes. So sometimes the prophets would refer, to those tribes, to the 10 northern tribes collectively as Ephraim. But that's not the way it's supposed to be done. The way that it's supposed to be done is we go to the promise in Genesis 48, which was specifically about the tribe Ephraim becoming a great multitude of nations. And that's what we look at, and that's who we allow to conform our beliefs about the fullness of nations in the end with Paul. Folks, I hope you enjoyed it. I put a lot into that. That was mostly off the cuff with a few notes, but I really feel like you get what I'm saying. I'll put some notes in the comments. Maybe I'll even make a PDF and post it on my community page tomorrow when I share this. So, folks, have a great day. We're making amazing strides. IO is the champion and will always remain. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.